Hey, Dr. Phil here. You know, I help people solve difficult problems every day, but one problem has me stuck: childhood hunger. Nearly 16 million children in America struggle with it. Luckily, the Feeding America network of local food banks collects surplus food, giving hope to hungry children and their families. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Okay, what are you wearing right now?
Nothing.
That's right. So Mom's going to teach you how to dress yourself. Underwear always comes first, name tag at the back, then pants, then shirt. Get the first button in the
All right,
middle.
ready to rock.
Socks going first, then shoes, right on right, left on left. With shoelaces, just take the ends, cross them over, switch the loops. The rabbit goes down the hole, pull tight, and you're left with bunny ears. Got it? Why are your pants in your head?
Most parenting is hard to do in just 2 minutes. And 2 minutes twice a day, making sure they brush their teeth is easier, and it could help save them from a lifetime of tooth pain. Visit tunein2x.org to find out more. A message from the Partnership for Healthy Mouths, Healthy Lives, and the Ad Council.
This is WGBB AM 1240 and W240 GF FM 95.9 Freeport, New York.
The views expressed in the following program do not necessarily represent those of the staff, management, or owners of WGBB. Live from the WGBB studios in American, New York, this is Sports Talk New York.
All right, and that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of WGBB Sports Talk New York, right here on Long Island's oldest radio station, WGBB New York. Thanks for tuning in here. I'm your host, Rob Cramer. We got a lot going on today. There's so much talking about right now as we're here in Christmas week right now. I can't believe we're just a couple of days away from it right now. It seems like this year really flew away. Especially the sports year. It seems like the beginning of the year with playing, games without people in the stands, which, let's keep our fingers crossed that we don't get back to that point. But, it seems like that was so long ago, and now here we are. We've almost got another NFL season in the books, only a couple of weeks left of regular season games. The Jets and the Giants both dropped their game today. Both falling to double-digit losses again. We'll get into that momentarily. On the good side of things, the New York Mets have named Buck Showalter their manager of their ball club, the most experienced manager that they've had since they hired Terry Collins about 10 years ago. And if you're going to go on most experienced, in the history of the franchise, the only manager for them, when they hired him to have managed more games, is their original manager from 1962, Hall of Famer Casey Stengel. So a lot of stuff to get in with the Mets, a lot of fun numbers like that. Buck will join a interesting crew of 5 that have managed both the Mets and the Yankees. If you remember, Buck Showalter was the manager of the Yankees in the early 90s. He even appeared in an episode of Seinfeld when George Costanza wanted to change the uniforms from polyester to cotton. That didn't work out, but it didn't work out for Buck in the Bronx either, as he was ousted before their championship days in the mid-90s. But hopefully, Buck looks to buck that trend and turn it around in the 2020s with the New York Mets. So we'll get to that in a minute, too. Also, we'll be touching on a couple of our hockey teams as the Islanders played. The Islanders played today, dropping one to the Vegas Golden Knights. The Rangers just had a game canceled because of COVID constraints. They were supposed to be playing on Wednesday. That game won't be happening anymore. That was going to be at Madison Square Garden against the Montreal Canadiens, but the NHL has postponed any games where teams will have to cross the border between now and after Christmas break, which would be anytime post, December 27th. So we're probably not going to see that game made up until sometime in the new year. It's really going to be a crunch. The Rangers have already a couple of games to make up, one against Ottawa, one against the Islanders, one against this team now, the Canadiens. So they're going to be squeezing a lot of games into a short amount of time. If you remember too, there's going to be Olympic break. Now, that's what they have penciled in right now for the beginning of February until about February 20th or so, right around there. If for the NHL, there's going to be a full blockout of games. No NHL games will be played during that time. It's expected that NHL players will be sent to Beijing for the Olympics, but they're still trying to hammer that out and get all the details down. So we'll be getting to that in a little bit too. Also, I want to touch on the Knicks. The Knicks have been very inconsistent this year. Such a disappointment that through the first 30 games, after the refreshing hard play and defensive style and a very New York winning type team that they had last year in the COVID shortened season for the New York Knicks. They won 40 plus games for the first time in years, made the playoffs. Not looking that good so far, but it doesn't mean that things can't change. Before we get into all that, ladies and gentlemen, I know that's a long-winded intro, but like I said, we've got a lot to get into today. You can check us out, WGBB, on Twitter, at WGBB Radio. Check out WGBB SportsTalk on Twitter as well. Look us up on Facebook, give us a like on there, comment on all of our stuff, and check us out on WGBBSportsTalk.com. Check out all of our old shows, all the old interviews we've had. Great stuff like what Bill Donahue just gave us in the last hour, which if you didn't get a chance to listen to, definitely check out in the future. 2 great interviews from Bill Donahue. But with that said, I want to get into some of the football that we've seen today. We'll be talking about Buck and some of the other stuff in the second half of the show. But I want to start off with the Jets and the Giants. No matter what you want to say, I mean, okay, the Jets had a somewhat spirited effort, not so much for the Giants. It's still a loss. It's still a loss for both teams. The Jets dropped to 3-11. The Giants dropped to 4-10. With that, we'll start with the Giants. Actually, the Giants they fall to 4-10. They now have 5 consecutive seasons of where they've lost double-digit games or more. That means at least 10 losses in 5 straight seasons, and that goes back to 7 of the last 8. If you go back that far, and the only brief period of reprise that they had was the 11-5 season in 2016 under Ben McAdoo, but we all know how quickly things went down the drain on that one. So if you haven't been paying attention, then Daniel Jones suffered a neck injury a couple of years back. This issue kept him sidelined for the last couple of games. He'll probably be sidelined again for next week too, and there's a good chance he misses the rest of the season, but you never know. Now we get the Cowboys and the Giants, which there have been a long period of time where the Cowboys and the Giants, you could pencil that in your calendar and say that's going to be a fun game to watch. That's going to be a competitive game, and no matter where these teams are in the standings, I'm going to want to be sitting on my couch or in the stands watching this game. Well, that was not the case on this Sunday afternoon. The Dallas Cowboys beat the Giants 21-6. Dallas has now won 9 of the last 10 games against the Giants. So this ownership of one team, which is something that really didn't exist for a lot of years, even when the Cowboys were winning their Super Bowls and the Giants were a little bit down in the post-Parcells era, it would always be competitive games. Even when you had Parcells over there and Jim Fossil coaching here, and in the Tom Coughlin era, just a very, very. It's always been. It doesn't matter who the guys are. It doesn't matter who's wearing the jersey. There was always a fun game to watch and highly competitive. But definitely not today. The only 2 things you saw from the Giants was 2 field goals from Graham Gano. I mean, they started Mike Glennon, who went 13 of 24, 99 yards. If you look at that in a vacuum, it doesn't look too bad. But you throw in the fact that he threw 3 interceptions and just looked terrible for the most part. You knew exactly how this game was going to go. As a matter of fact, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm replaced him, went 6 of 12, 82 yards, and he didn't turn the ball over. So fans and the Giants coaching staff and front office were very, positive about his outing coming out of that. So there's a good chance that this kid gets a shot to maybe start a game or two if the Giants are still going to be without Daniel Jones for an extended period of time. On the other side of with the Giants, you got to look behind the quarterback, the running back. Still not getting anything from Saquon Barkley. As explosive as that guy looked his first year or two in the league, it's crazy. It's much like Odell Beckham, although Beckham really didn't take his game level down until his post-Giants career. But I mean, it's crazy how he's a completely different player after this injury right now. You see a glimpse of what he once was every once in a while, but he still does not look 100%. 15 carries, 50 yards today, had a fumble. They're going to need more out of him. Former number 2 overall pick, a guy that, it's probably a good thing they didn't pick Sam Darnold in the long run. A lot of people were giving the Giants crap for it that day and that week, but, I totally understood at the time the tantalizing draft pick that Saquon Barkley was at the time coming out of Penn State. He was a guy that was a lot of people put him on a float to the Hall of Fame, or as Mike Francesi used to say, on those roller skates, sending him right into the Hall of Fame. And right now it's just not the case. That fumble today, he even got outperformed by his teammate who had been filling in for him in his injury. Devontae Booker, was the small bright spot, 8 carries for 74 yards. You want to tip your cap to him. He's kept his play level up. The Giants play Philly next week. You can say what you want about that game. Doesn't really matter. The Giants are out of it now. This game really sealed it. I mean, they not only... Their season has been over for a couple of weeks now. I think everybody has known that. But especially with this extra playoff team that's been added this year, there's been, a little more confidence from fans of teams that normally wouldn't be in it this time of year. You're walking a little bit more confident this late in the season, hoping with your fingers crossed that maybe your team can get into that final spot. That's what the Giant fans were doing. Hey, if the Jets had that, I'd be doing the same thing as a Jet fan. But it just didn't work out. The Giants not making the playoffs this year, definitely not winning the division. Really just a shame. Now Joe Judge has officially coached 30 games as Giants head coach, and he's lost 20 of them. 10-20. That's, record speaks for itself. You are what your record says you are. There's nothing else you could say about that. There's a very good chance that we're watching the end of the Dave Gettleman era. There's a very good chance that we're even watching the end of the Joe Judge era. A guy that just arrived on the scene last year. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if Mara canned Gettleman and had his next GM keep Joe Judge. That would not surprise me at all. But you know what? We've seen that before when Woody Johnson ousted their former GM, bringing in John Idzik. After that, they got rid of Mike Tannenbaum, who had presided over, the franchise dating back to the Mangini days. He was a guy that had a lot of pull up top. Well, they got rid of him. They brought in John Idzik, and boy, that was an epic failure. Epic failure. I mean, the word epic isn't even big enough how bad that John Idzik hire was for the Jets. And, Dave Gettleman, he's accumulated some talent, but boy, he set out to build an offensive line a couple years ago, and that offensive line is as big of a dumpster fire today as it was 3 or 4 years ago. Whenever, Will Hernandez looks like a swing and a miss. There's no cohesion on that. They can't get anything. That could be a big reason why you're not getting anything out of Saquon. I mean, he doesn't have that ability to make guys miss. Maybe he needs those holes opened up for him more now than ever. Maybe he's, this guy he needs help from the players around him. And the fact is right now, he ain't getting it. So, we could be seeing the end of two Giant eras right now. I do think, and I've been a guy who in the past has defended Dave Gettleman from angry Giant fans. And I don't blame Giant fans for being angry. I just think they're being slightly impatient. But you know what? Maybe their impatience was proven to be true. Because I think Dave Gettleman is going to be shown the door after this season, whether they keep Joe Judge or not. That's going to be a decision made up by John Mara and the guys running the show over there at the Giants, who, by the way, if you were lucky enough to spend $20,000 on your personal season ticket license for MetLife Stadium to be a Giants fan, and you've had to sit here and pay that $20,000 for at least the last 5 straight years since this team has been in the trash can, 7 of the last 8 years with double-digit losses, like I mentioned before. Well, guess what their olive branch was to you today? Their olive branch was to give you a free medium Pepsi. That's right, a free medium Pepsi. I don't know if that comes with ice or not. They might be pushing it. And don't you dare ask for a large, because if you ask for a large, well, they'll probably just charge you an extra $5,000 for your PSL. So keep that in mind, Giant fans, as the Giants obviously don't care about what a bad PR hit looks like, because they've been taking it on the chin all week for that one. And with that, we'll go to the somehow more PR-friendly Jets. I don't understand how it's even possible, but at least for today, it is. The Jets put up a much better fight than the Giants did today. The Jets ended up losing down in Miami, 31-24. There were no free Pepsis given out at that game. They ended up losing 31-24 after they had a 17-7 lead early in that game. A real early 10-0 lead. It could have even been 14-0, but the drive stalled out in the red zone. Now for the Jets, just like we mentioned a moment ago, the Giants struggling against a division opponent in the Cowboys. Same thing with the Jets against Miami. This is now their 5th straight loss to Miami, dating back to when Adam Gase was the head coach of the Dolphins, not even the Jets. So the 5th straight loss there. Jets fall to 3-11, blew the big 10-point lead early on. Zach Wilson, what can you say about Zach Wilson? 13-23 today, 174 yards. Did not turn the ball over. He was sacked 6 times, though, so he wasn't helped by his offensive line today. Much like Daniel Jones and the Giants, obviously Daniel Jones didn't play today, but you know what I mean? That just not protecting your quarterback and letting him get hit like that. The Jets are lucky he didn't get hurt today with all those sacks. When you look at it, from this point of view, it's not a bad game because Zach Wilson did not turn the ball over today. So while he didn't wow you, and while you weren't blown away by what Zach Wilson did, he didn't turn the ball over. He protected the ball, and especially when they had that lead and everything, he went into play with a lead mode, where he wasn't taking any stupid chances. Maybe he should have. Maybe that was a bad call by LaFleur and the offense and the coaching staff. But you know what? They didn't take any chances. They tried to milk it a little bit, and it ended up blowing back on them because once they flipped that switch down, they couldn't flip it back on. And once it got to the second half, they just were not able to get their act back together. And they ended up, it was 17-17 at halftime. They just could do nothing in the second half. Zach Wilson, very disappointing in that second half. But you know what, though? My biggest criticism, though, won't go on the offense, because the offense did produce. The offense, they put up 24 points. Well, it's not exactly Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, or it's not going to remind you of Peyton Manning in his heyday with the Indianapolis Colts. What it will do is, for a good team can win with a game like this from its quarterback and its offense at least producing. Well, the offense technically produced 17 points. The defense in Brandon Echols returned an interception from Tua Tagovailoa, former Alabama quarterback, now the starter of the Miami Dolphins. He returned an interception for a touchdown that tied the game at 24. but then Miami would just get the ball right back, punch it down the field to take that 31-24 lead that they would never relinquish. But as I was getting to that, the biggest criticism of the day I would have is on the defense, but more specifically, the run defense. Because the pass defense did their job. The pass defense, looked very solid at times. Tight coverage. They're forcing turnovers today. You had the Ashton Davis interception. You had the Eccles interception return for a touchdown. So you really have to give it to a very young defensive backcourt for playing a hell of a game today. The run defense is what failed the Jets today. The run defense, allowed Duke Johnson and Myles Gaston, more specifically Duke Johnson. Myles Gaston kind of came on at the end, had a couple of big runs when the defense was a little beat up already. But the guy that just ran it all day right down their throats was Duke Johnson, former Cleveland Browns running back. And the run defense just could not make a big stop when they needed it. And that was the difference in the game. The run defense allowed the Dolphins' offense to dictate the pace and dictate, how often they would convert these third downs and how they could keep drives going. And there's nothing the Jets' defense could do about it. They just let them walk all over them. And unfortunately, it led to this collapse and eventually losing the game to the Dolphins down there in Miami. A couple of bright spots was Michael Carter. He had a couple of nice runs, but overall, 8 carries, 18 yards. Not going to really knock your socks off. Not a very good day overall. But, you keep seeing bright spots out of that kid. I hope they keep plugging him away. I want to see him, especially with the season being down the drain now, I want to see him be given the opportunity that he's earned through this year. Because with a shaky offensive line and shaky different quarterbacks at times and different protection and everything like that, the kid's had a pretty good rookie season, so he should be rewarded for that. This was another winnable game for the Jets that they just blew. And, one thing I will say is that as disappointing as this first year under Robert Saleh has been, there has been a lot more being in games and having a chance and not outright rooting for a draft pick in October. You know what I mean? With Gase and even the last year or two under Bowles, by the time Halloween came around, the season was over. And while the season was kind of over by Halloween this year, they were still winning games and fighting and beating teams that were better than them and competing with teams at times. I know they got trashed by the Patriots a couple of times. I know they've had their bad moments. They lost that game in London to the Falcons earlier this year. They should have won. There have been a lot of potentially good moments that blew up in the Jets' face this year. But you know what? It's better than the last couple of years where there hasn't even been those moments where you'd say to yourself, oh, hey, maybe they have a chance to win this game. Because the last couple of years, in the middle of you saying that sentence, they would blow the game. You wouldn't even have a chance to get it out. By the time you say, oh, maybe they have it'd be over. The game would be done. And they'd be down by 3 or 4 touchdowns, and it's the first quarter still, and you're saying to yourself, why am I putting my girlfriend through watching this game? Because that's a situation that happened to me a lot last year. Now the Jets on the docket coming up have another very bad team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who just replaced Urban Meyer as their head coach. If you don't know, Urban Meyer he was a first-time NFL coach this year. He's a former college coach, broke the college ranks this year, joined the NFL to be with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He joined his star quarterback from college too. Trevor Lawrence was the quarterback for Urban Meyer in college, and they both went to the same NFL team at the same time. The Jets handed Trevor Lawrence to them on a silver platter last year when the Jets beat the LA Rams late in the season. That second win cost the Jets this kid Trevor Lawrence, who has not had a very good season, although he has looked better than Zach Wilson, and I will say that. But you know what? I think this is another winnable game for the Jets. Now the question is, do you want to root for a win, or do you want to root for a loss? Because if the Jets lose to the Jaguars this coming up week, then it would really help them in their draft pick hunt. If you want to score the highest draft pick possible for the 2022 NFL draft, which is supposed to take place in April of next year. And the Jets already have their own pick, which is going to be high because their 3-11 record is one of the worst in football. So they're going to have a high pick. Probably only the Lions and the Jaguars are really in their way for that number 1 slot. And then they also have the Seattle Seahawks pick, which is going to be another top 10 pick most likely. And if it's not top 10, it'll at least be top 15. And, the Giants are in the same boat. The Giants have, their own pick, and they had the Chicago Bears pick. So there's a possibility that 4 of the top 10 NFL draft picks could be coming to New York next year. So we could see better football on the horizon. That's something to keep in mind. The Jets, after the Jaguars next week, it's going to be a wash. 2 really, really tough games. They play Tampa Bay at MetLife, which is going to be interesting. See Tom Brady playing against the Jets for the first time outside of a Patriots uniform. And then the week after that, the season finale, the game which will set the record for the most regular season games the Jets have ever played, along with every other team in the NFL this year, as the NFL added the 17th game in the 18th week this year, will be the season finale in Buffalo. So we saw how the last game against Buffalo at MetLife Stadium went. Well, Buffalo just danced all over the Jets. You got to just keep your fingers crossed and hope they keep it competitive up there in Buffalo. But it's going to be Buffalo in January. So it's a chance we see a pretty snowy game, and anything can happen in games like that. So that should be a lot of fun if you see that on the horizon. And with that, we covered a lot of ground here in the first half, talking this football. In the second half, I'll be getting into a little baseball as we have the lockout coming up. The MLB lockout went into effect on December 1st of this year. So we are nearly 3 weeks into this lockout. But the Mets just hired their manager today. So we'll get into that. We'll get into the Knicks, little Islanders, Rangers, all that and more. Stick around. Thanks for sticking with me here on this Sunday night. And I'll catch you again in a minute.
You're listening to Sports Talk New York. Tune in every Sunday night at 8 p.m. on Long Island's WGBB, broadcasting on 95.9 FM and 1240 AM, or listen live online at WGBBradio.com. Country Foot Care, official podiatrist of New York Lizards, have been delivering state-of-the-art foot care with good old-fashioned care to Long Island residents for over 30 years. Specialists in sports medicine and foot injuries, Country Foot Care can be reached at 516-741-FEED or online at countryfootcare.com. Stay connected to Sports Talk New York on WGBB by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at WGBB Sports Talk. Unflippable, unflappable, unlinkable. The Gustbuster is the only umbrella that won't flip inside out, rip, tear, or leak. Capable of withstanding winds over 55 miles per hour. All of our umbrellas are constructed of the finest quality materials and backed by a limited lifetime guarantee. What are you waiting for? Visit Gustbuster.com and get your Gustbuster today. You're listening to Sports Talk New York on Long Island's WGBB. And now, back to the show.
And that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Sports Talk 1240. Sports Talk New York, I'm sorry. As we here on WGBB, Sports Talk New York, I like to do a little something called This Day in Sports History. This day in sports history on December 19th, 1983, The original FIFA World Cup trophy, also known as the Jules Rimet Trophy, is stolen from the headquarters of Brazilian Football Confederation in Rio de Janeiro. They're still looking for it, as the original has never been returned. On this day, December 19th, 1984, Wayne Gretzky, at the age of 23, becomes the 18th and youngest member of the NHL 1,000-point club, as he eclipsed the mark with a 6-point game in a 7-3 win over the LA Kings. On this date, December 19th, 1985, ABC announced that it was severing ties with longtime announcer Howard Cosell. One of the all-time great announcers, he'd go on to announce until 1991 before officially retiring. On this date in 1986, the Parachute Man from the 1986 World Series, he was ordered to pay a $500 fine and do 100 hours of community service after he parachuted into Shea Stadium during Game 1 of the 1986 World Series and between the New York Mets and the Boston Red Sox. And finally, on this day in 2003, December 19th, 2003, the Steve Bartman ball. That's right, the ball from Game 6 of the 2003 NLCS between the Chicago Cubs and the Florida Marlins, which went into the stands, and outfielder Moises Alou could not get to because of the actions of a fan in the stands that wasn't paying attention to the game. He was going for a foul ball. He knocked the ball out of the mitt, and the next thing you know, the Marlins would go on to score a bunch of runs, come from behind, and beat the Chicago Cubs. Well, on this day in 2003, that ball was purchased by Cubs fans for $106,000 and promptly exploded in a restaurant behind Wrigley Field. Now, this was also 13 years before they were able to break their curse and win their first World Series since 1908. So that was a desperate fan base doing desperate things on this day in sports history. So once again, thanks for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm your host, Rob Cramer. You can check me out on Twitter at Cramer New York. You could check out WGBB on Twitter as well, WGBB Radio, and give us a like on Facebook as well, WGBB. So, in the first half of the show, we talked a lot about the bad decisions and the mistakes and the just absolutely, absolute incompetence at times of the two football teams in New York, the Jets and the Giants, as we've seen nothing but disaster from those two franchises for really most of the last decade. Really since the Giants won the Super Bowl about 10 years ago against the Patriots for the second time in 5 years at that point. But since then, it's been nothing but downhill. We've seen the Yankees make good decisions over the last 10 years, make bad decisions. Get rid of Joe Girardi, bring in Aaron Boone. Get rid of A-Rod. Sign Carlos Beltran. Get rid of Masahiro Tanaka. There have been a lot of things the Yankees have done, but the Yankees have remained, a pretty productive team throughout the decade. You can sit here and make the argument, should the Yankees have won a World Series? Yeah, you can say that. They probably should have at least been to one. But, they kept getting knocked out by the Astros and the Red Sox, and they ran into a couple of really talented teams over there. And also, those teams they played weren't exactly playing on a level field. I don't know how much of a level field the Yankees are playing on either. So, it seems to be all a wash over there. But either way, no matter what you want to say, the Yankees have been very good and productive over their time for the last couple of years. Now, on the other side of town, the Mets, 10 years ago, they named Terry Collins their manager. He became their manager for the 2011 season. It was his first year here. He lasted all the way through 2017 and ended up managing the most games in Met history and getting them to a World Series in 2015, which a lot of people did not think Terry Collins was going to do. A lot of people, myself included, thought the Mets would have to hire another manager after Terry Collins to take them to that next level. But TC, Terry Collins, proved out to be the man for the job. And you know what? He's a good baseball man, good baseball instincts. Just has been in the game forever, knows every situation. He's not going to screw up on, pull a Mickey Callaway and screw up your lineup card and get guys out. That's Bush League kind of stuff. And that's not the kind of stuff you're going to see from Terry Collins. And he gave the Mets a new kind of legitimacy. I mean, a lot of people would laugh at that at the time, saying, how did Terry Collins give the Mets legitimacy? And you know what? It was just because it was a no-nonsense guy who was going to come in and do his best to have these guys playing on nothing more than merit. And that's what we got out of Terry Collins. You knew they were going to be a hard team to play against. And even though they were going to go through their bad stretches, which they did, they were never going to, beat themselves before they walked out on the field. And Terry Collins always made sure of that. And that's why he was the perfect guy to take them to the World Series in 2015. But since then, they made the playoffs in 2016. They lost that playoff game, the one-game playoff, the wild card game, to the San Francisco Giants and Madison Bumgarner, who would just dominate the Mets that day and knocked them out of the playoffs. And then it began. 2017 came, and that was an injury-ravaged, terrible season, one of the worst years of Met baseball I can remember. Then 2018 was just another, they hired Mickey Callaway. It seemed like it was a decent decision at the time. Obviously, he turned out to be not only the wrong guy for the job, but just a bad guy in general. Their vetting process has been thrown into question. Then after that whole, Terry Collins, they let Terry go. They do this whole thing with Mickey Callaway where, a lot of people weren't even sure they were making the right decision after 2019, letting Mickey go, because that was a team that still finished 10 games over 500. That was a Mets team that hadn't finished over 500 since the 2016 wild card game. So it had been at least 3 years since they've even sniffed being 500, and they were under 500 in July, and Mickey really was the captain of the ship when this team went on that second half tear. So coming into 2020, a lot of people thought the Mets had already made a decision in letting Mickey go. Now, obviously the stuff he did behind the scenes didn't come to light till after that, and everybody kind of saw Mickey Callaway in a different way. But, it was even questioned at the time letting that guy go. And he was not a great manager anyway. Like I said, he had his very bad moments, very questionable in-game manager. Then they went out after letting him go, and they bring in Carlos Beltran. Carlos Beltran, probably the best free agent acquisition to perform on the field for the Mets they've ever did. They signed him in 2005 to a 7-year, $119 million contract. He played very well for them over that time, had a couple of injuries later, got traded to the San Francisco Giants, netted them Zach Wheeler, who was great for them for years, and also one of the biggest mistakes the stiff Wilpons did before they went out was letting Zach Wheeler sign to the Philadelphia Phillies. That's going to be a black mark in this organization for the entire length of his 5-year deal in Philly. Thanks for nothing, Jeff Wilpon. But now the things are starting to turn around a little bit. They had to let Beltran go at that moment because all the stuff came to light with the cheating in Houston and everything. So Beltran was let go. They brought in Luis Rojas, who, Rojas was put in a really tough situation. I like Luis Rojas a lot. Obviously, people still do. He ended up getting hired by the Yankees to be their third base coach this year now for Aaron Boone. I would have loved to keep Luis in the organization, but you know what? Luis Rojas was not a major league manager. He's much more equipped to be a growing manager in the minor leagues, in my opinion at least, where he helps guys grow down there. Or he could even be a manager at the major leagues, just not in New York, because New York it's going to chew you up and spit you out. You have to sit here, and he gave these nonsensical rationalizations for some of his moves sometimes. And believe me, I'm not putting it all on Luis because I know the front office was making some calls too. So it's not all on Luis Rojas. But hey, he's the guy that had to take the fall for it. He did not do a great job. Once again, same thing as Mickey Callaway, weak in-game manager. Now that I got all that out of the way, the history lesson and everything else beyond that, the Mets hired Buck Showalter as their manager. Great job for the Mets. Gave him a 3-year deal north of $10 million for the longevity of it. Biggest in team history for a manager, beating, get this, Art Howe. Now, if you're a Met fan and you're thinking to yourself, how the hell is Art Howe the highest manager in team history? Well, he surprisingly was. That's why the Mets have classically, for the last 15 years, lowballed their managers. We wouldn't have been getting Buck if the Wilpons were still the manager. You could guarantee that. But you got to tip your cap to Steve Cohen. He knew his man. He interviewed Buck. He interviewed Joe Espada, and he interviewed Matt Cattaro. Those were the final 3 guys: the Rays bench coach, the Astros bench coach, and an analyst at MLB Network who had 20 years of managerial experience under his belt, Buck Showalter. Buck gets the job. A 2-pronged interview where he did a pre-Zoom interview with the front office and guys, just a get-to-know-you type session, Billy Epler and Sandy Alderson and all these other guys. Then, after they progressed past that first interview, it went to the second interview where he was then brought to Steve Cohen's residence. I believe that's here on Long Island. I'm not exactly sure where Steve Cohen lives, but he was brought to his residence, and they had the second interview. Supposedly this was on Friday evening after the markets closed because of Steve Cohen's day job, and it went great. They said that Buck checked every box for the Mets. He's just one of these type of guys that he's the smartest guy in the room. That's what Mark Teixeira said. Mark Teixeira, former Yankee world champion first baseman, played under Buck Showalter when he was with the Texas Rangers, and sung his praises, saying that Buck is, quote, the smartest man in baseball. I've also heard former All-Star and center fielder Adam Jones from the Baltimore Orioles say nothing but great things about Buck. There's a level of respect that comes with being with Buck Showalter, and that's what he is. Apparently, he's going to be introduced to New York in the media and everything on Tuesday. They were going to try to do it on Monday, but I think they're going to hold off until Tuesday now. That's at least what Mike Poom of the New York Post has been reporting, that they're aiming for like a Tuesday. It's possible they still could come out and say that it's going to be tomorrow, but I'm thinking it's going to be Tuesday. And if you want to look at Buck's resume, there's a lot to go over. The guy has 20 years of experience, like I said. And if you're going to look at it, it starts with managing the Yankees in the minor leagues in the 80s. Then he was Stump Merrill's third base coach for the Yankees for a couple of years. Then when Stump Merrill was dismissed as the Yankee manager after the 1991 season, then he was he was made the full-time manager from Gene Michael and George Steinbrenner gave him that title from 1992 to 1995. During that time, you got to remember, this was not the Yankees that we remember. This was a Yankee team that was coming off multiple losing seasons. They lost 90-plus games. Buck was really helping change the culture and build these Yankees from the bottom up. This Yankees team, too, by the way, was nowhere near as talented as the Mets team he's joining today. He was building this team up from the bottom. And, during his time there, he was .313 and .268 with the Yankees, .539 winning percentage. He was the 1994 AL Manager of the Year for the Yankees when they ended up finishing that season 73 and 49 before the strike ended that season and canceled the World Series. Everybody was really saying that it was really just a race and a countdown to having a Yankees Expos World Series, as those were the two best teams in baseball at the time. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see that. But when you look at what Buck accomplished, though, he got the Yankees back to the playoffs next year. In the shortened season, they were 79-65, won the wild card, finished second in the East, and played the Seattle Mariners in the first round. They lost in 5, but that was the first time the Yankees had made the playoffs since 1981. That was the year before Don Mattingly got there. So, that was a long time ago that that Yankee team made the playoffs. That's the days of Reggie Jackson and Sparky Lyle and Willie Randolph, and it had been a long time since the Yankees had made the playoffs. And after that '81 World Series loss to the Dodgers and Fernando Valenzuela, the next one was 1995 when they lost in that 5-game epic series to the Seattle Mariners, that ended with the Edgar Martinez double in the corner and Ken Griffey Jr. scoring all the way from first base. Really, if you haven't seen that game, watch that game because it's a hell of a ride. It's a lot of fun to see the excitement in that game, especially from that Seattle crowd, which that was the first time the Mariners had ever made the playoffs. So a lot of emotion on both sides for both fan bases and both teams. That was the last play of Buck Showalter's managerial career with the Yankees. The next time that you'd see him was with the Diamondbacks when he got picked up to really shape that team. He had a lot of input in the original ballpark there. It's called Chase Field now. It was called Bank One Ballpark at the time. The little walkway between the pitcher's mound and the catcher, that was Buck Showalter. A lot of the things about that stadium had Buck's touch on it. A lot of things about the franchise and the players they picked and the way they went about their business and built it from the ground up. Once again, that's Buck. He's a builder. He's going to show people the way to do the right things. And Buck built that team up. They ended up winning 100 games. They had a bad year their first year. It was an expansion team. Makes sense. They went out the offseason. They signed Randy Johnson. Buck wins 100 games the next year. The fastest team in Major League history. For an expansion team, they made their playoffs in the second year. Now, they ended up losing to the Mets in that first round. Thank God. I would have been devastated as a 12-year-old if the Mets had lost that series. But, they were the 1991 NL West champs. He was 250 and 236 there. He was there from 98 to 2000. Now, what a lot of people forget, the Diamondbacks went on to win the World Series in 2001, the year after Buck left. Same thing with the Yankees. The Yankees went on to win the World Series in 96, the year after Buck left. And, what a lot of people don't give him credit for is that Buck was one of the guys really pushing for the Diamondbacks to trade for an injured Curt Schilling the year before that. So they acquired him from the Phillies for Omar Dahl and Nelson Figueroa and a host of other players. And they brought him into Arizona, and that laid the groundwork for the 2001 World Series champions. After that, he had a much less fun career with the Texas Rangers from 03 to 06. He went 319 and 329, 10 games over 500. Missed the playoffs all his years there. 03, 04, 05, 06, missed playoffs every year, but won 89 games in 2004 for that team, the year after they traded A-Rod, and won the 2004 Manager of the Year as well. So if you're seeing a trend, he won the 94 with the Yankees Manager of the Year, the 2004 Manager of the Year with the Rangers. And that would come back also in 2014 when he'd win it with the Orioles. He's a 3-time Manager of the Year, 3 different teams. Just shows how great of a manager this guy is. He's got over 1,500 wins. He just came off a 9-year stretch with the Orioles where he went 669 and 684. 2014 AL East champs. Went to the ALCS for the first time in his career. They got swept that year by the Royals, but still had a hell of a run. Like I said, 3-time Manager of the Year. This guy's resume speaks for itself, and he's joining the Mets at the perfect possible time. You know, he's one thing he's going to have to come over is that one of his last big decisions that blew up in his face was the 2016 wild card game when he was managing for the Baltimore Orioles. Buck went out there and did not bring in Zach Britton. Now, if you don't know who Zach Britton is, he's a current Yankee, lefty reliever, by no means a left-handed specialist. This guy could get lefties and righties out. He was the closer, all-star closer, for the Orioles that year. Had a record-breaking season, one of the best seasons that a major league reliever has ever had in history. He had a 0.54 ERA. Now, if you don't know what that means, I can't even express to you how ridiculous that is. I mean, if you look at everybody went crazy about Aaron Loop this year for the Mets, who had a fantastic year, and his ERA was 0.97. Still amazing. Under 1, if you have an ERA of 1, you're having a great year. But if it's under 1, you're just out of control. And to have an ERA a half run better than that at 0.54, mind-blowing. Just absolutely mind-blowing. So he took a lot of flack because they played the wild card game against the Toronto Blue Jays in Toronto that went into extra innings at 2-2. It went to the 11th inning, and the entire time he left Zach Britton sitting on the bench. Now, if you look at it from his point of view, he was saving his golden bullet for, as the away team, if his team took the lead, that he'd send Zach Britton right in to close the game out and send them to the next round if they ever took the lead. The problem is they never took the lead, and you never took the chance of putting him in the game. So with that, you had your best reliever, potentially that season at least, your best player, didn't even appear in an all-or-nothing winner-take-all game. So that's something that he's going to have to overcome. Supposedly, even actually in spring training 2017 for the Astros, he apologized to Britton and the entire team for his mistake, saying that he holds everybody else accountable for his mistakes, so he's going to hold himself accountable for his mistakes. So I give Buck a lot of credit for that. Veteran managers, we saw two of them in the World Series this year, in Snitker for the Braves and Dusty Baker for the Houston Astros. So don't think just because you have an older coach that there's or an older manager that there's no way that you can have a good season or a season that you expect to have. So I want to tip my cap to Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson and Billy Epler and anybody else. I just want to say, thankfully the Mets finally have people that don't throw up roadblocks to get good people in here. They're not worried about having another smart guy in the room because they want to be considered the smartest guy in the room, especially when they're not. So that's why you have to bring in a guy like Buck Showalter. He's going to challenge. He's going to challenge Billy Epler. He's going to challenge Sandy Alderson, and if needed at times, Steve Cohen. They might tell him, "Oh, we want you to do X, Y, and Z," and Buck Showalter is going to sit there and he might say, "Okay, you want me to do X, Y, and Z? Tell me why. Give me a reason. Give me a reason why that you're taking this decision out of my hands," which happens in a lot of major league clubhouses today. So Buck Showalter is not going to sit here and take anything lying down. The Mets have their own man right now. They have a guy that is just a great baseball guy, a guy that looks at the game from a lot of different ways. I think it even helped him now that he was on MLB Network for a year or two and saw the game from yet another angle. So this guy's been an executive. This guy's been a manager at the major and minor league levels. He's been a player. He's been a commentator. He's been a guy that you can... Buck Showalter has seen the game from so many different angles. I can't wait to see what he shows the Mets. Even Manny Machado, who's a guy that a lot of people would not think would take kindly to a guy, a hard-nosed manager and everything like that. Manny Machado said that he would not be the player he is today without Buck Showalter. And Manny Machado is one of the better players in baseball. So you got to say that, especially these young players and everything, Buck Showalter is going to come in and show these guys how to play the right way. And from what we've seen for the Mets the last couple of years, that's exactly what they need. Just to finish up real quick, as we've already touched on a lot today, I just want to finish up with the Knicks. It's been such a disappointment to see what we've gotten out of the Knicks this year. They lost against Boston last night again. We saw Kemba Walker back. Bless you. And they lost 8 of their last 10 games. They've dropped their record to 13-17. In their first 30 games this year, they are not looking anything like the hard-nosed, defensive-minded team that we got to know and love last year. It was good to see Kemba get plugged back in the lineup last night, coming up for 29 against his former team. I know he must have had some extra motivation going on there because he couldn't have liked getting traded by the Celtics after signing with them. Evan Fournier, too, great game. His second 32-point game against his former team last night. The Knicks really have to get a fire lit under their butts by Tom Thibodeau. I know we don't have much time to talk about it. Just about done here, ladies and gentlemen, as we're down to our just over a final minute. But, the Knicks have a big week coming up. Tuesday against Detroit, Thursday against the Wizards, Saturday, Christmas Day, against Atlanta. You got to go 3-0 if you want to really start talking about the playoffs again and getting back in good shape for playoff contention. But, we're going to have to get back to that next time, ladies and gentlemen, as I am out of time here. Thank you once again for tuning in here to Sports Talk New York with me, your host, Rob Cramer. You can tune in next week, and we'll have another great show for here on WGBB from 8 to 10. I'll be back with you again in the new year. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, have a great holiday season and Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.